of time
Vamos con la segunda ponencia de esta mañana, que llega de la mano de Margarita de Luxán, García
just
de
in
Diego.
traffic
Ahí
in
la
our
tienen.
cars. It's
Margarita es
unbelievable.
arquitecta y
Now we're
catedrática
going to hear from
emérita,
Margarita
experta
de
en
Luxán. She's an
bioclimatismo, ha diseñado más de
architect
80
and
edificios
emirate
sostenibles
professor.
y ha
She's
liderado
worked on
proyectos de
many
rehabilitación energética. Es muy
renovation,
reconocida por su
energy
enfoque en
renovation
arquitectura adaptada
projects around the world,
al clima y
adapting
lucha
architecture
contra la
to the
pobreza
climate and
energética.
fighting
Margarita nos va a hablar
energy
de
poverty.
interacciones entre
Margarita is going to talk
edificación
to us about
y espacios
interactions
urbanos.
between
Margarita,
building
bienvenida,
and
muchísimas
urban
gracias, un
spaces.
placer.
So welcome and thank you very much.
Espero que me vean detrás de la
I hope you can see me behind the podium.
Bien. Vamos a ver cómo avanzo. Perdón. Yo voy a hablar de confort energético.
I'm going to talk about energy comfort from the perspective of heat above all, because what we're facing ahead is a heat crisis, and I'm going to talk about temperatures above all. I'm also going to look at how we often divide territorial planning, urbanism, building solutions, but actually they're all very interconnected topics. These interactions can be positive or they can be negative, of course. This is the heat island of Madrid. There have been 2 studies about this heat island. On the left, it dates from 1985, and in 2016, we carried out this second study. We went around the city, registering temperatures, and look at the change. 1985 is the first one. That's not that long ago, really, but we can see that the range of temperatures is, well, we can see a 4-degree temperature increase in the heat island, not the average temperatures. This is Madrid specifically. We measured temperatures at nighttime between the hours of 11 p.m. and 1 a.m. And there's lots of things at play here, of course, climate change, but also an increase in urban surface, more buildings, and so greater inertia at these temperature increases. And there's been such a great increase in temperatures because there are so many services, so many parking lots that are asphalted, and so they retain that heat. This is a thermography. Take an image, a temperature image taken with a drone. It was taken at 7 o'clock in the morning. So the space has been cooling down all night, but it's impossible to distinguish the very warm temperatures at the street level and those on the roofs, which have released heat during the nighttime. So we can see here what happens with the heat from buildings, from the ground. And we can see that they're all connected. These urban conditions, the conditions in these open spaces that are being determined by the buildings that surround them. And this is something that we happen all the time. This image shows the Calle Hortaliza, a street in Madrid. For the apartments at the upper levels, there is a certain set of conditions. We can see that in the winter months, they harness this sun to warm up the interiors, but in the summer months, they need to be protected. We can see that in the winter months, this is a positive thing, but we need to protect the entire facade of the building so that the temperature doesn't increase too much during the summer months. And so urbanism requires that these buildings be adapted to meet these different needs. You can see, though, that there is a wall of 1.5 feet of red brick, which is emitting to the streets twice as much heat to the passerby than underfloor heating would. So what's happening is that these walkers will die of heat as they walk around the pavements of this neighborhood. And this is something that we see all the time. So oftentimes we want to label things, we want to name things. We say, it's very hot, yes, but we need data. Here we have an urban development occupying one block in a town called Casar de Cáceres in Extremadura in Spain. The first option here on the left, we have 70 meters of facade facing the south. But then we rethought our proposal and turned it around to the one that we see on the right. And here we have a 460% more facade facing the south. What we did was separate the wings of the building so that in the winter months, the dwellings would have sunlight in the winter months. These 4 hours during the middle of the day have enough sunlight to warm up these apartments. So what this is a passive solution which orientates the building in the best possible way. So, of course, there's synergies that exist between urbanism, between the buildings, the systems. Here we can see a small square that we covered in solar panels, which would create a roof so that there would be shade underneath. The orientation of these solar panels meant that there would be sunlight during the winter months and shade during the summer. I think then that we need to break down these distinctions that exist between these different parts of these building projects. Here we have air conditioning units for every friggery, so kilocalorie of heat removed, that emits into the street 1.43 calories of heat. So it makes absolutely no sense. And these figures are quite shocking. And everything has an effect, ultimately. So in Madrid, for instance, in the center of Madrid, there are some natural ventilation systems that exist in buildings that are there already, and they use these central light wells and staircases to bring ventilation into the building and cool the buildings down. For example, we see a picture of a doorway here with some vents in the top, which allowed for excess heat to escape. Nowadays, with cars that release CO2 that accumulates at street level, means that these ventilation panels aren't able to be used because it would mean that all of this contamination would enter into the buildings. But when we have changes, when we move towards electric cars, this will no longer be a problem. So we need to actually protect these traditional ventilation systems for this future scenario of the cities. Even the tiniest detail has an effect. For a few years now, in many urban planning legislation, there has been a trend to take away the original rendering of these buildings to show the rough stonework behind it. Here we can see a picture of the town hall of Villafames in Castellón. This is a stone facade building, but the one to the right of that has been stripped of its original rendering, and we can see this stone. Unfortunately, this isn't the right decision for the building because it was never designed to have a facade like this. And this trend has been copied throughout the town. Even the main church in the town, the castle, have been renovated in this way, but mostly the housing. So what's been the effect of this? Well, the town council made, actually, these homeowners do their renovations in this way. And this is happening in lots of places in Castilla-La Mancha. They require that 70% of the facade should have this stone on show. We visited this town twice, in March and in June in 2014, and we took a series of measurements to see what was happening with the heat. Of course, there is a lot more heat transfer because this layer, this outer coating, has been removed. And we found that in the springtime, the difference in temperature between a building that retained its original lime wash and one that has stone, there was a 3-degree increase in temperature in those buildings that had that lime wash removed. But in summer, at the end of June, the temperature increase was 17 degrees. We didn't go in August, but this temperature difference would certainly be probably above 25 degrees. So small decisions that have a big impact. And of course, for a pedestrian now walking through this town, the thermal experience is completely different. We carried out another study entitled The Inhospitable City in Guadalajara capital. What we did was measure the temperatures of elements in public spaces every 2 hours over the course of 2 days in August. We wanted to see how the temperature differences would impact the usability of these different elements. It was a big study, so I'll just give you a few details. There are 2 photos here of the main square in Guadalajara, the Plaza Mayor, so a space that, in theory, people of Guadalajara should be able to spend time and enjoy. The photo on the left shows that the only place where you can see people are standing in the shade of the neighboring buildings. There is a wooden bench, which is in the photo in the middle. It's painted in dark brown, and we took temperature measurements from there. We found that the benches that were in the shade maintained more or less the ambient temperature, but the benches that were in the sun, and you can see this is the red line in the graph underneath represents those, the temperature reached above 50 degrees Celsius by 9 o'clock in the morning, and it maintained this temperature until 8 p.m. It actually reached up to 76 degrees Celsius at midday. So, of course, this means that the only people that are going to be enjoying this square are the people who are sticking to the shade around the periphery. In this square, we can see some ventilation shafts. They built an underground car park underneath, which has its ventilation shafts via these very pretty metal structures. These have been used by children from the town as a slide, and they love to play on them. Here we have a news article from the local newspaper who talks about the most unexpected effects of the heat of the summer months. They had to take one child to A&E because he burnt himself quite seriously on the metal of these vents. So you can see that there's now fences guarding them, but once again, there's still no one there. You're not able to sit on anything because you'll burn yourself. So once again, we can see these small decisions are having big consequences. Children also have parks to enjoy nearby, but let's see what's happening in these parks in the summer months. We measured the temperature of the paving slabs. They were okay, bearable, but if you go down a yellow plastic slide, it would be 48 degrees Celsius, and the blue one 60 degrees Celsius. So of course no one can go down these slides. This soft paving was around 60 degrees Celsius in the sun. Under the trees, though, it was only around 25 degrees. So this park should not be exposed to the sun. You have to take into account what happens to these materials when they're exposed to the sun. Ultimately, these investments are not able to be used. Here's another example. This is in El Toyo, Almería. It's an urban development. We won a contract to build over 100 dwellings with swimming pools. You can see it's right by the sea, and at the very top you can see the wind directions, the frequency. So we could use this data because of course we needed to ensure that there was some ventilation in these dwellings and we could harness the sea breeze. But there were some hotels in the first line of the beach, which meant that we were only able to take advantage of some very narrow ventilation routes. But we needed ventilation. If we wanted to build a bioclimatic housing that was low energy dependent, well, we needed to harness these sea breezes. So what we did was create these wind corridors that went through all of the different blocks. They were oriented towards the south, but they were blocking the wind. So what we did was put some wind chimneys or some ventilation shafts in place. We weren't able to use the cross ventilation, so we also ensured that the stairwells were open air in the shade as well. And we really looked at all of the little details. We had elements that cast shadows on public spaces. We made sure that these elements were separated from the facade so that the heat that accumulates on the facade was able to escape as well. So this is a large-scale project now. We've seen small-scale examples before, but what is in common with all of these things is this attention to detail. Because otherwise we can find real contradictions in our designs. What about Santa Cruz then now? This is the bioclimatic graph here. And when it comes to climate comfort, we could absolutely meet these biocomfort needs passively. We can ensure with designs that there is enough ventilation, another shade. There are a whole series of season-based strategies. We can work with thermal inertia. We can work with positioning of insulation, shades, all of these kinds of things. Now, look at this graph for outside spaces. This is very similar. We can see that from a certain moment in the year, we need to sit in the shade. We need shade in order to have thermal comfort. And once again, there are lots of strategies that we can use. We need to move air around 4 to 5 meters per second. The architecture needs to bear in mind this climate. If not, then of course we need energy for all of our devices, but we could be saving a fortune on air conditioning units if we were to bear in mind these strategies. We have amazing conditions that we're working with here. There is a very, very high level of solar sunlight exposure, around 70% in the summer months. So if we need sun to warm, in the winter months rather, so plenty of sun to warm ourselves up in the winter. There is also a great change in the sunlight that we receive in the winter and the summer months, so we can design our buildings to use the sun to our advantage. We have a lot of examples of these curved building facades that have sunlight in the winter and shade in the summer. We can correct orientations of buildings by using elements that catch the sunlight or shade us from it. There's an awful lot that we can do, as I say, because we have these excellent starting point here of the climate conditions. Here we have some images that look at ventilation in Santa Cruz. It's something that we can harness. The wind moves fast enough for us to be able to really utilize it, as long as we don't create obstacles for that wind. But we do have around 14% of time in the year where there is no wind. So at these moments, we need to find a way to move the air with passive systems. So I'm talking about positioning of buildings that create currents that ventilate the entire facade, among many other things. Another thing to mention is that we should also use these light wells to give light to the dwellings without them warming up the whole facade. We need to harness our natural conditions, as I said. Now, in conclusion, I think you can see the slide better than I can, but basically what this slide says is that interactions are key. We can measure this data so that every small decision is taken in a sensible way. We have to think about urbanism, architecture, and building in a coherent way. These three things need to be connected and need to work together and in isolation. These things need to be addressed in the urban plans, in every single construction project that takes place. In Santa Cruz, bioclimate architecture is definitely a possibility. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias a Margarita y ha aportado distintas soluciones para distintos espacios. Lo que tenemos claro aquí es que nadie va a llevar a los chiquillos a Guadalajara en pleno mes de agosto porque a alguien se le habrá ocurrido
None of us, I think, will be planning our holidays in Guadalajara in August after seeing those images. You talked about the wind here in Santa Cruz in September, November, October, December, all the months with an R in it, are of course the best months to come here because there's less wind for our Teresitas beach next to the capital. So yes, different times of the year, different environments that must all be taken into account. That was great, that roofing with the solar panels for the central square, which gives shade in the summer and sun in the winter.